Well, it's the last day. We're sitting on the couch at the Airbnb, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It took 9 days, but my throat's starting to get a little scratchy, so I want to apologize in advance. But pretty excited about the conversation we're about to have. We have Joe Miles in the house. Thanks for taking the time out on a Sunday morning.
Man, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So we got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about, obviously whitetail tactics. We're going to talk about kind of Joe's resume, featured on Whitetail Crib. So I would say, like, for anybody that hasn't caught that episode, go check that out because it's amazing place, some amazing animals. But I guess, Joe, I don't want to butcher this any worse than I've already have. Take 5 or 10 minutes, introduce yourself, and kind of talk about your whitetail resume. And I know you've done a lot of other stuff other than whitetails, but
sure, no,
we'll keep it whitetail focused.
Yeah, whitetail focus, absolutely. Joe Miles, grew up in South Carolina. Columbia has been my home forever, and my dad was a big hunter. At one time, he had taken the 11th largest whitetail in the state of South Carolina.
Which was how big and what year?
I don't remember the year. It was before I was born, so sometime in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was a 156-inch deer. And for back then, at one time we didn't have many deer in South Carolina. Like if they saw a track, they hunted a track. So he killed a really big one. He was a hardcore whitetail guy. We had some leases, had a small family farm, and every weekend we went. And the bug got me really, really early. I shot my first deer with him when I was 5 years old. Yeah, there he is with that's his buck. That's him.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And so 5 years old, first buck, with him, and even backing up a little bit before that, when I was in diapers, he would take me and wrap me up in a sleeping bag and put me at the bottom of his tree. And he would climb up literally. Now this is funny. He would climb up in his tree and, 8:30, I'd wake up and I'd come out of this sleep and I'd look around and I'd be in the middle of the woods, not knowing where in the heck I was. And all of a sudden a piece of candy would hit me in the head and I'd look up and there's my dad up above me. And I'm like, what is going on? But multiple times. And back then, the stands had those, big pegs that you'd hammer in. There's some kind of giant nails. And, he would climb those things, and it was just like 2x4s that you would sit on up in the tree. And I can remember wrapping on his neck and hanging on his back like a monkey and him climbing me up into those stands.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, he was addicted to it. I think he shot 50 deer in a row without a miss. I mean, he still hunts a good bit, but not like he did. So grew up in a family like that, started basically hunting on my own. And he turned me loose. When I was 12, 13 years old, I had a little cut-off 243 rifle. And he said, time for you to figure it out, buddy. And made every possible mistake I could make. Got introduced to bow hunting when I was 16 and went out and missed a doe. I was doing some spot and stalking in a swamp we had access to, and walked up to a doe and got about 20 yards away from her and launched one over her back, no sights or anything. And this is it. And I never looked back from there, bow hunting, ever since then. And yeah, it's been a huge, terrible obsession, passion, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that's kind of where I came from and how I got started.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I'm kind of jealous. I wish I was brought up that way,
Well, I think, getting kicked out of the nest and learning how to fly on your own. Do you think that has helped you over the years?
No doubt. The one lease we had was 1,200 acres, and we would hunt in the mornings. And, depending on what happened that morning, that day, I would just take that rifle and just go. I'd be gone until way after lunchtime, looking at scrapes, looking at rubs, jumping deer out of their beds, again, making every mistake you can make and just trying to, start putting it together on how to do things. And you never put it all together. Every deer is absolutely different. And, but by doing that, you really learn, so much about how they act. It's where I really learned the edge. Big cutovers, meet hardwoods. It was like I got to a point where I would look at a place that I could see, and I said, "There's going to be rubs and scrapes up here." And you'd go up there, and sure enough, that's right where they would be, just because you've seen it so many times.
There's a couple things there that I want to circle back to. One, you mentioned you've made every mistake in the book, and I think that's the only way I learn personally. Like, I have to go out and physically make the mistakes. I mean, I could draw from other people's experiences, but until I make the mistake, I don't kind of put everything all together. And everyone learns a little bit different. But you've hunted whitetails pretty much all across the country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many different states have you hunted whitetails? We'll start there.
Man, I'd have to count them. I've hunted in Washington State. I've hunted in Montana, Kansas, Texas, Mexico, Alberta, North Dakota, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Illinois, Ohio. The other main ones.
Pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some things that you've learned, hunting South Carolina, that you find applicable to these other states? Because there's habitat's different, pressure's different, the regs are different.
The number one thing is reliable intel. It doesn't matter, and I should know this. I just got back from a mule deer hunt in Mexico, and I listened to a guy that's not super serious about the hunt, and he's probably going to hear this podcast and call me, but that's okay. But and I did zero research, nothing. I didn't call. I looked at the place we were going on website and saw some big mule deer and thought, yeah, we're good. You have to, and I don't know that cliche is the right word, but you have to do your research and make sure. It doesn't matter if you're going to Washington State. It doesn't matter if you're going to Ohio or Alberta, Mexico. You have to do your research and make sure where you're going is what you're expecting it to be, because you're limited on time. You only have 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it may be. And if you're not dialed and know exactly what you're getting into, I have done it a lot, and I can know within 2 hours of being there if I'm wasting my time or not.
So what happens when you get into that scenario and you feel like you are wasting your time?
This hunt, normally I'll leave. I'm 47 years old, and I'll pack it up and go. And now I pretty much, other than this, because it was more of a social hunt, the Mexico hunt for the mule deer was more of a social hunt, and I was fine with it. I had 3 really good buddies there, and it was a great experience just from camaraderie perspective. But if it's a serious hunt, I normally don't get myself in that situation anymore. And what I mean by that is you get into a spot, and for example, we've got a ton of trail cam intel. When you get here, you can see, you've got this property to hunt that nobody's been on. This is just an example. And you get there, and I haven't pulled the cards. All right. So there's, red flag number one. You go out to the property and Jim hunted on the corner of it, last week. And if you have that, it's a mistake. And how you avoid that is with relationships. The guys that you build relationships with, whether it be Washington State or Alberta or wherever it is, those relationships have to be solid and reliable. And that's really the number one thing about traveling. I mean, you get to a point, you guys, a lot of the guys in the industry that are serious about whitetail hunting, you get to a point where, everybody's kind of got it figured out. There's tactics that everybody basically uses, talking about the wind, hunting the edges, whatever it may be. And then it all comes down to the property you're on and the access you have. And that, again, it's universal with wherever you go. It's wherever you go, you've got to have the right property, and you've got to have access that you're able to get it done.
Have you ever found yourself on the right piece with potential, with the wrong access, and then in your mind kind of forcing yourself to get creative to be able to leverage that piece or find success on that piece?
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to think of any example of that.
Because I'll elaborate that on a little bit, but there's, I guess I found myself, Cameron I know has found himself on different pieces, whether they're kind of public or private, that we have information. We know that there's target deer there, and then we screwed up with access because for whatever reason, and when I say access, it's not always the wind for us. Sometimes it's visual, sometimes it's the audible, the noise that you're making walking in. And I think that's something personally that a lot of guys overlook. Everybody's thinking about the wind. I think, everybody understands that. But there's more to access than just the wind, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. So an example, I can think of a property in Kansas I hunted that had some weird access that you had to, the only way to get into the funnel was to go through a field that a lot of deer, were feeding in. And so that was the only way in. The neighbor wouldn't let you come in off of his cattle stuff. He was worried about that. And so I only hunted it in the mornings, and I would get in the stand at 2:30 in the morning. And, that's what it took.
Yeah.
And I actually did not kill a deer on that, but I saw a lot. But I figured the stuff that I would bump, stuff would settle back down. And so, I had to sit in the dark for forever, but it was the only way I could figure out how to do it, because I go in there in normal hours, 5:30 in the morning, you're blowing everything up. And so I said, look, I want to hunt it. There's big deer in here. And the only way to do it is, hunt it in the mornings. I mean, you could hunt it in the afternoons too, because you could get across that field. But if you were going to hunt it in the mornings, and that was when the deer were coming back through there, was to get in there super, super early.
That's interesting.
Yeah. What about whitetail to whitetail, from South Carolina to Kansas to Alberta? You said you got to play the wind, hunt the edges. What are some of the other things that are transferable? Like, you're hunting whitetails. Everyone talks about it's a whitetail, but we all know that whitetails in Kansas and Ohio and South Carolina and Alberta are different.
Yeah.
But what are the things that people should still prioritize no matter where they go in the country?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, and again, this is a phrase that's probably thrown around a lot, is the deer really pattern us as hunters. And I know you hear that all the time, but for example, I have a hunt club. There's 12 members in the hunt club that I hunt, and everybody that goes in that hunt club does the exact same thing. They go to the gate, they open the gate, the chain sounds like, it's just super loud. They open the gate, they drive into the parking spot, they hop on their four-wheeler, and they crank it up. It's loud, and off they go. And so, I just kind of looked at what they were doing, and what I would do if it was a Tuesday morning when nobody was, I would stay away from the weekends, obviously. But Tuesday morning, I would drive in and park outside the gate, never open the gate, and walk to wherever I was going, or take my electric bike. And the woods were absolutely alive with deer, because they know they're hunters that are coming in that time. And then another thing they would do is at 9 o'clock in the morning, everybody climbs down. So if it was a weekend that I wanted to hunt, had the right wind, right weather, whatever it was, I might not even get in the stand till 9 o'clock in the morning, and, sit till 2 o'clock. And I promise, guys think that's nuts, but it really is amazing how the more mature deer at 9 o'clock in the morning will start moving, because they hear those guys come out. So I guess your question was, how does that equate to like a Kansas, for example? You can take some of that, and it's amplified 50-fold there, because the deer are a lot less pressured. So, anything that, a particular property is good intel to get. How did the guys hunt it, last year? What do they do? Well, they did this, 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 and this. Well, then I'm going to do that, and that. So that's something that can really help.
We've mentioned a couple different things here, and it keeps circling back to like being creative, right? Like not being kind of in a shoebox. Do you think like the mainstream content, you guys put out content with the podcast, obviously we're heavy on branded content. Do you think putting out mainstream content hinders whitetail hunters?
Mainstream content, like what do you mean by that?
North American whitetail articles, TV shows, podcasts, blogs. I mean, things that are in the public eye. mainstream. Cameron, give me an example. Mainstream content, the hunting public.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, people are they have more access now than ever to how everyone else is doing things, and like being creative becomes harder.
Oh yeah,
because we're telling everyone how to be creative, or we're telling everyone you got to go deeper. You're telling everyone that you got to do other things. Do you think that makes it harder?
It's no doubt it makes it way more challenging. I think when you can create real value for guys, especially guys that are just getting started, you create value for them, and help. From a brand perspective, that can create loyalty, to your brand by helping guys out. But there's no question. I know the public ground scene has exploded the last few years. I mean, that's the new cool thing, right? I mean, that's the badge of honor. If you kill a buck on public land, out of your saddle, I mean, that's the
I feel attacked.
If you don't do that, you're not hunting, right? So no, it for sure that's it makes it way more challenging. And what it does is the prices of leases, through the roof.
Yes.
And a buddy and I were talking about this the other day, is we want to keep it from becoming a rich man's sport. And man, these private properties, $30-$40 an acre, and buying a farm is ridiculous. I mean, how much the farm prices are, and then the public land's crowded. So it's becoming more and more and more challenging, and you just have to keep thinking outside the box and doing things a little bit different, and maybe holding a few things in your back pocket that you don't talk about on podcast and put out, into the mainstream content. But I think if you can help guys, it comes back to you.
Yeah,
I really do.
What about things that you found whitetail to whitetail that are not transferable? Like something that you can, more talking about like hunting pressured states where you go to an Iowa or a Kansas and the deer are, like you said, they're not as pressured. Feels like you can get away with a lot more in those scenarios. When you go back to hunt a pressured state like South Carolina or Pennsylvania or somewhere in the East, what are some things that you have found that you're like, well, if I go back home, I can't do that? Or just certain experiences, like Chad and I in Iowa, we're like, you got deer downwind to you, and it's not doing. You're not doing it. Do you approach every hunt that you're going on like you're in South Carolina?
I try to, because then I know that I'm putting myself in the absolute best possible situation. But for example, Kansas, my buddy Chris Seymour out there, he hangs a lot of stands that are 4, 5, 6 feet off the ground in a bare tree. And if I did that in South Carolina, I would not have a deer within 100 yards of me. I mean, they would pick me off. If I don't have cover and if I'm not at the right elevation, there's zero chance. And so why not do that in Kansas too? To avoid it. And you're right when you talk about the wind. I mean, Texas, for example, that's a place that I won't say it doesn't matter, but you get away with so much more. And guys, you hear guys talk about this all the time. A big mature buck is going to always quarter into the wind. That's not true. I've had them come in with the wind in Kansas and Illinois with the wind at their butt. They're going to go where they want to go, especially during the rut. And so, ideally, if you can set up, you hear the old thing, the wind that's good enough for him and good enough for you, or you're right on the edge of the wind. Yeah, in a perfect world, that's great. But that's not always the case, because I have flat seen 8.5, 9.5-year-old bucks that have been shot, come in with wind, at their back. Excuse me, the show's getting me too. If you can set it up where he can quarter into the wind and it's still good for you, that's awesome. I'm not saying, don't use the wind, but I guess the point of that is there's no rule that's absolutely matter of fact consistent.
Yeah, that's fair.
Have you seen that scenario, like those tailwind scenarios, happen more in open country? Have you drawn any conclusion?
You mentioned Kansas and Illinois. That it makes sense to me immediately that visually they can cover themselves a little bit easier with the wind. Yeah,
using their eyes or their vision to scan what's out ahead of them. They have a tailwind, or walking with a tailwind, moving with a tailwind. So have you drawn any conclusions to that, or seen that happen more in open country?
Yeah, you don't see it a lot in South Carolina. We I guess early season South Carolina, we hunt a lot of food like small plots, muscadines, briar beds. We hunt a lot of that early season, and I will say every single mature buck he will circle no matter what downwind of that food source before he comes in. I've seen it a million times in South Carolina. And then I feel like Illinois, Kansas, a lot of times they'll just walk right into it. And it could be a visual thing. I'm not exactly sure why they do that, but that is definitely something different between, and it may just be really high pressure deer versus ones that, that grow up. You talk about guys that live in these neighborhoods that feed, with their hands, mature deer, 5-year-old bucks, and they're creatures of pressure, man. If they're knocked around a lot immediately, in these neighborhoods that there's no hunting in, and then they allow it because they get overpopulated. Man, 2 seasons in, it's like everywhere else.
Yep.
They're so smart and creatures of their environment. It's amazing.
So you talked about earlier on in the conversation that you made every mistake in the book.
Mm-hmm.
There it seems like there's a point in everyone's hunting career, I'll use the term career, that you make a mistake and you're like, okay, I need to stop doing that. Or like Don Higgins, it always clicks in me when we talk about Don Higgins that he's like, in the past 5 years, I've killed my 5 biggest bucks.
Mm-hmm.
5 out of my 6 biggest bucks. And he's doing it now. And it's always more consistent. There's something that happens to someone that gets them to the point of consistency.
Yep.
Do you have a sequence or a hunt or a mistake that you've made that taught you the most about like how to be consistent on mature whitetails?
Yeah, I really think what is it? Murphy's Law is that what it is? Where if it can go wrong, it does go wrong. And so many guys, including myself, they don't control everything they can control. And that goes to the micro finite detail. What boots am I wearing and why? What socks am I wearing and why? What pants am I wearing and why? What broadhead am I shooting and why? You have to always ask the why. You just don't, because Jim shoots it. Well, who's Jim?
Yeah.
Jim shot 1 buck in 7 years, and he's a big blowhard guy. Everything you can control, where you put your stand, what stand you're using, what trail cameras you're using, are they reliable? Are they consistent? Every single detail. And as soon as you skimp on one of those, that's the one that's going to bite you. We were talking about one example, having the camera base in the way. I had a giant 9-point in Illinois that I was hunting, and we finally got a crack at him, and I tried to get drawn, and the camera base from the camera guy was in the way, and I couldn't get drawn because it was on the right side of the tree. Of course, we weren't expecting him to come that way, and what does he do? He comes that way. So where did I screw up? I should have been able to shoot all the way around the tree. I should have said, no, Kevin, move it further over. And I was lazy and didn't do it. Just like you get lazy and you don't want to put the extra step up in the tree and saw that one little branch. And what happens? He comes right through there and you hit that branch. And so that, for me, that's the thing I try and be better at is not being lazy. And if I can control it and do it, that's what I do. And then I've done everything I can to put myself in the best situation.
How long did it take you to get to that point and realize you need to control the variables?
A long time. It taking you, especially, growing up at home, I get lots of opportunities at decent deer. But when you get out and get to hunt something world class and you screw it up a few times because of something like that, that's when it really goes, wait a minute now, man. If you need to approach it like a pro athlete. Almost, where you're focused on it like a Tom Brady attitude, where you really, from the time you wake up in the morning until you go to bed. And if that means it's a rainstorm and I need to go move a camera and the rain's coming in at 3 a.m., you need to get up at 3 a.m. and go move that camera. Those are the things you have to do that if you're really serious about it and you want to kill world-class deer, those are the things you got to do. If you got to move that stand, if you know, this is the wind is terrible here. My spot in Kansas, the public land in Kansas, whatever, it's going to be good there. It's a 9-hour drive. Man, make the drive.
Yeah.
You know, those are the things you have to do. You as soon as it starts creeping in of your brain starts making excuses for you. That's where you're screwing up.
Yeah. When your conscious has enough time to screw something up, it's going to.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. Just from hearing you say that and thinking back to my experiences as a young bow hunter, I think it's challenging for me to, one, have enough experience. Like you said, it takes you a long time to get here. Have enough experience to know all of the variables that you do need to control. So I have found myself lately just focusing on, like, I screw something up. Okay, get that right. And then something else happens to me, like, okay, now I have to get that right. And then you kind of train yourself to get each one of those right, and then it becomes a whole. I've found myself, like, just my trip to Iowa this year, I tried to do everything right? Everyone's trying to do everything right. But by focusing on such a broad picture of everything, I screwed up a ton of little things.
Yep.
I wasn't shooting my bow enough, or I didn't think about, I knew, like Chad said, we know that the deer are there, but I didn't think about my access enough to get there, or I would screw these tiny little things up. But every time I screw something up, by the time that I screw the next thing up, the thing prior is autopilot now.
Yeah.
Now I'm good to go for there. And then you just start to build a repertoire, like a package, and you're like, okay, I got this all. I got this. But I'm guilty of it always. Like, I'm going to sit here and listen to a podcast. Joe Miles told me to do this. I'm like, okay, he told me I know how to do it. But I don't have the experiences to back that up, and that can't be substituted.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, we're in a day and age where everybody wants to kill big deer, whether you're, a veteran and been doing it for 20 plus years, or if you've just picked a bow up and you're new to it, you're 2 years in, and there is no substitute for, like we said earlier, screwing stuff up and having experiences. And probably oftentimes you guys, I've made this mistake as much as anybody else, but focus on having encounters versus trying to pick out a 170-inch whitetail and focus on one deer. I think there's a big gap there that, or not a gap, it's a trap.
Yeah.
It's a trap that we've created as a community.
Without a doubt. I mean, guys have come by the booth this week and, like, man, I passed on this 4.5-year-old 160 because I think he might be, and I'm like, how many 160s have you shot? Well, I hadn't, but I'm like, dude, plant that buck. Come on. Yeah. Let's, what have we done here? I mean, good, more for me and you, right? I mean, it's fine, but come on. I mean, my son, especially, I mean, the last thing, I want him to do is shoot a 170. He's 19 years old, man. He needs to plant some does and, knock down some nice bucks and get excited about it, because where does he go from there? Right. I mean, it's really a,
it's a progression.
It is a progression. That's a very good word.
It's something I battled it heavy just from being engraved in all the content and stuff. And then like Whitetail Cribs, for example, right? I get to travel and go to all these trophy rooms, and I'm looking at all these deer, and I'm like, oh my God, there's now, to me, another 170-inch deer is just another 170-inch deer because I've seen so many of them. But then I get in the woods and I'm like, dude, biggest buck I've ever killed until last year was 140 inches. I'm like,
and that's a great deer.
Right.
It's a great deer.
And I'm shooting as many, Chad says it all the time, is like another 120 on the wall. I was like, I'm shooting as many of those suckers as I can, because the experience that I got from that, I can't replicate.
Yeah.
And then it just makes you so much better. And then when a 160 comes in, you're dialed. You're able to do it. That deer I shot in North Dakota this year, it could have been another 120 and he would have got the business just like he did. And like every time that happens to you, you just get better and better and better and better.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay, hard transition here. I want to circle back to some strategy and tactic stuff. Somewhere throughout the last 10 years, like, hunting October mornings has become like sacrilege. Like, don't do it. Buy your time. Wait till it gets good. 3rd, 4th week of October into November. Like, spend your time there. What's your opinion on hunting mornings? And if you do it, what's kind of your
Yep.
strategy?
So I will do it. You know, a lot like you say, a lot of good guys say wait until the end of October gets cold, because and the thought process behind that is you're going to blow your spot up before the deer are moving in daylight. Um, and there's a lot of validity to that. The revolution that kind of came around was trail cameras, right? And I don't care if it's September 5th at 9 o'clock in the morning, October 5th at 8 o'clock in the morning. If I get a picture of a deer that I want to kill in the morning in October, I'm hunting him then, because I mean, maybe that's simple and common sense, but don't give up. I mean, the biggest deer I killed this year in Kansas daylighted October 14th at 8:30 in the morning. Now, I had found out exactly where he was bedded, and he was coming back into his bed, but I absolutely could have killed him early October, because I had incredible access. It was a 9.5-year-old buck, and I ended up killing him on I think the 17th of October. I did kill him in the afternoon, but I was planning on hunting the next morning. I got him coming out.
So walk us through that scenario. Like, if you hadn't killed him that, the evening of October 17th, what was your plan?
Yep.
The next morning.
So this particular farm, and I'll be long-winded here, or maybe try and speed it up. But so this was a buck, probably one of the best deer stories of my entire life hunting. He was 9.5 years old. As a 4.5-year-old, he got shot in the butt, in the hip, by a guy. And as 5.5, we thought he was dead. Never found him. He showed back up. This is in Kansas. As a 6-year-old, my buddy Adam Hayes hunted him for the whole season. Never saw him. As a 7, and he went on to do other things. As a 7-year-old, I hunted him. All nighttime pictures of the deer, and November 2nd, last picture of him, and he vanished, gone. Thought he was dead again. As an 8-year-old, a guy threw a couple cameras out, and this is again not thinking like a big deer. There was a huge cedar thicket where we called him the tracks buck because there was a railroad track, huge cedar thicket across the tracks, and that's where we thought he was bedding. That wasn't where he was bedded. This guy, and it goes back to the first time hunter, stumbling into the exact right spot. This guy goes out there to hunt. We think that deer's dead, drops a camera 150 yards away from an old cattle barn. Boom, daylight. So the guy hunted for 2 days, didn't like it because he was only seeing 1 or 2 deer, so he left. And the deer obviously made it through the season. But when you look at the map now, there's a small 6-acre grown-up cattle pasture that an old lady owns that doesn't allow any hunting in it, and it's right by a barn, and then it goes into the big funnel out, and he was living in that little 6-acre thing. And having done this for so long, you would have thought that's something that, I would have looked into, but I was so fixated on that giant patch of cover, and that's not where he was. So now I've got basically all the pieces of the puzzle. I know he's living in there, and I know he's coming out at night. So I go out there. I got drawn, which is another thing with Kansas. You got to get drawn. So after I got drawn, went out there, went ahead and hung stands, got stuff situated, got cameras out, and went back out in October. I guess it was we'll have to look at the calendar, but anyway, mid-October, my plan was to hunt the rut. That's what I wanted to do. I was going to get my stands hung, everything hung mid-October, and then I was going to come back Halloween and just hunt the deer the entire rut. Set everything up, fly home. When I land, I had a text camera, and it shot me a picture of him at 8:30 in the morning coming back into bed. And I already had a stand hung there for Northwind, and I landed on Friday, got the picture, got another daylight picture of him that evening. And, a lot of guys say the older the deer get, sometimes the easier they are to kill. And that could be the case. But so I told my wife, I said, I'm flying back. There's a cold front coming in on the 17th, and I'm going to hunt this deer. And, she said, have at it. And so flew back out there on Sunday, and guy picked me up, had an old Suburban, went out to the cabin, unpacked everything, went and got in the tree. And I guess that's another thing, a South Carolina tactic. Instead of pulling into that barn, I actually drove a bike all the way around and parked up on a hill and came in with the north wind and got in my stand. And the plan was to hunt that afternoon, and then the cold front rolled in overnight. And then I was going to hunt with a north wind. I had like 5 days of north. I was just going to stay in that stand and figure with him being unpressured at all and being that early, I was going to stay right there. And sure enough, doe comes out, and she's in a pick bean field through the little cedar thicket funnel. And I heard a cattle fence. I heard it ping, and it was him coming out of that 6-acre little cattle pasture, grown-up cattle pasture, jumping the fence. And I can't see back to my left really well, and I'm looking at the doe, trying to look over here, and all of a sudden she throws her head up. And I said, yeah, she's looking at him for sure. And I looked, and then it was just 180 inches of antler. Here it comes, right up through that little gap. And it was the overlook spot where he found, that was his bed. And I really think if I hadn't have killed him that afternoon, I would have killed him the next morning coming back in there. But it was a perfect setup. Access from the north wind, and he's actually quartering into the wind when he comes out of there. So it is that old saying of it was really good for him and good for me at the same time. It was just a
perfect storm.
Perfect storm.
So with that deer bedded kind of in that 6-acre fallow pasture field.
Yep.
I'm assuming you didn't exactly know where his bed was.
Not the actual bed.
So how did you pick the spot?
Hmm.
How did you pick the tree?
Yep. So there was ag to the north. There was open cattle pasture to the south, and this was a creek, like a cedar creek funnel of cover that led all the way out to where there was alfalfa and beans up on top, and it was still kind of early season-ish, if you will. And so and that's where we were getting all the pictures of him at night. So I knew and this is 5 years of history, with a deer. So the nighttime pictures, we kind of knew where he was feeding. The missing link was, we kept saying, how is he getting there? How is he coming from that huge block of cover? And we concentrated so much on that end of the farm, we just completely overlooked. And again, it's a mistake. And once you figured it out, it just made absolute perfect sense that's how he would go. He would stay in that cover and go all the way up right at dark. And then he would feed until dark, until 30, 45 minutes before daylight. And then he'd meander back through that because he had never been messed with in there. Hop over the fence into that little section, sleep in there all day. Nobody ever bothered him.
You mentioned, prepping that, flying out, doing the work for hunting that deer in the rut. Did you hang the stand for Northwind, or was that just because it was in a funnel?
Okay. I had one on each side. I had one for south that was actually in the creek. I would have much rather been in that tree because it was absolutely dynamite bulletproof. You kind of walked in a little creek and just stepped out of the creek right up the tree. The other one, like I said, I had to ride the bike all the way around the farm and then walk in the cattle pasture. And I was worried from a sight perspective, man, he might, I'm kind of hunkered down, going through there. But it's one of those deer that, you're going to do anything and everything to get.
I want to go back a couple years in this story. What made you fixate on that big patch of cover? Was it because it was the biggest patch of cover, or did you have intel of that deer in there?
So that is the guy that shot him in the butt or in the hip, had all his encounters with him down there.
Okay.
And I'm not so sure now looking back at it that he wasn't bedding in that giant piece of cover and coming out of it. And then when he got shot there, he completely changed up. And I didn't put that together, and I should have, is that he relocated down to that other. And so everybody, me, Adam, everybody and Chris were all fixated on that end of the farm. And you know, and when you look at it on a map, I wish we had a map here that I could show you exactly how this thing laid out. It's a no-brainer that he's living in that big block of cover.
Sure.
You know, because there's not much cover there. I mean, it's really open, cattle-y. There's ag out there, and there's not a lot of deer. I mean, when I hunted him the 2 years prior, I think I sat 7 days, daylight to dark, and saw more coyotes than I did deer.
Yeah.
You know, but I would just look at a trail camera picture of him and go, this is why I'm here. I'm not leaving. And I know the last morning I hunted there was like the 18th of November. And I had this big doe come. She came out and was coming right down the trail she needed to. And I was like, this is it. He's going to be right behind her.
Well, just rewind 30 minutes in the conversation where you talk about like, what is the one thing that's transferable from place to place, and it's the deer patterning the hunter.
Without a doubt.
That deer, that was my initial thought the whole time you were talking about it. It was like he knows that you guys are fixating on that patch of cover. So I was curious as to, was it because of all the intel, like he was there prior, and then he just moved based off
That's
of
exactly what he did.
what you guys were doing.
He was still going to the food he had to go to, but the way he was getting there was completely different than what we were doing.
If Adam was hunting that deer when he was a 6-year-old, what did he look like as a 6-year-old?
He was in the 190s. And he had 48 inches of mass when I killed him.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, his beams are not real long, and his tine length wasn't long, but his mass is off the charts big. And that year when he was 6, he had triple flyers coming off the back, so he was definitely in the 90s. And he kind of stayed, even as a 4-year-old, I think he's like 175, and he stayed in that 175 to 190 range his whole life. And I'm getting him full body mounted. But because he's so big, I bet he's 320. His neck is like a 50-gallon drum.
It's mega.
I mean, yeah, I'll show you a trail camera picture of him. I mean, his neck is as big around as my gut.
Oh man. I also think it's interesting too, though. Once you figure, I mean, A to B, right, or bed to food, food to bed. Once you figured that out, you gave yourself options because you knew that was the spot. I think that's something that is something that it's a good takeaway from that story, that you gave yourself a south wind, you gave yourself a north wind because you knew the deer was there, he was bedded there. Bed to food was relatively consistent, and you needed to have options because if you didn't get the north wind.
Yeah, and again, that's you know, that's something I could control. I had the time, I had the ability to go out there, set everything up. And that was, again, one of those things that you can control, because I get there and I'm haphazard about it. Yeah, I got 4 days of north. I'm good. I'm going to get him killed. And then it switches out of the south. And then I got to go bebopping in there and hang another stand with him only being, 200 yards away. And I accidentally drop something and bang it. Or, he comes through there at night, smells where I've been monkeying around, the things that you can control. And I had the time, I had the ability, and I wasn't going to be lazy. So I got the Southwind stand hung. I got the Northwind stand hung, had my trail camera in there really early, like in August. And, it all worked out.
Did that deer summer there too?
We never ran cameras there early. Never. I do know that as of like November 2nd, November 3rd, he would go. We never got pictures of him after that. So I don't know. Adam says that he absolutely was the big dog in the area, and he had some place that he would take does, and he just stayed, in that spot. Because I kept saying he's dead. Somebody killed him, and he said no, we would have heard about it. And yeah, I mean, he just was a old clever buck. And Don and I were talking about it, and he really thinks there's some truth to this, that when they get to 8.5, 9.5 years old, they do start to, I don't know that let their guard down, but they will daylight more. They maybe shrink their core area down, but they'll move around in that a lot more because they become more comfortable. You hear that quite a bit. I think, was it Lee Lakowski that killed that Gnarls Barkley buck that was so old, and that was years and years ago, but he talks about how it never daylighted, and then when it got to be 8.5, 9.5, it was just every day it was in beans and whatever else. So you do hear about that, and I don't know, that's something, maybe we can get more intel on somehow.
Yeah.
You have anything else on kind of on that story, Cameron? Or?
Not on that hunt, no. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you don't have anything else, I want to kind of flip the conversation over to Asio and like how that got started, and what you're doing over there.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously the hunting clothing space is super competitive. There's some 800-pound gorillas in the market, and no different than the trail camera business, I'm certain. I think anytime you bring a product to market, no matter what market it is, you have to be filling a gap. You have to be, going into your niche and filling a gap versus just repeating the same thing. And I had the opportunity or did quite a bit of sheep and goat hunting. And so I used a lot of the premium stuff, the Kuyus, the Sitkas, I used that stuff. And before that, growing up, it was the cotton mossy oak and Realtree, and I'd freeze to death, right? And I'd look like the Michelin Man when it was 30 degrees in South Carolina.
Add another sweatshirt.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. 2 more pair of blue jeans, baby. and so that, that's how I grew up hunting, and you just dealt with frozen feet, frozen hands, and I can only sit for 3 hours, whatever. So went on these sheep hunts, and I was like, my gosh, wind can't get through this. I was just blown away at how good that stuff was. And I said, I would use a lot of that stuff whitetail hunting, and I'm not knocking these guys. It's just, I saw that the camouflage patterns didn't let me get away with a lot of stuff. Movement deer would pick me off. And if you really look at it, most of these companies were started in the West, and they gradually moved to the whitetail space because that's where the bulk of the market is. And it makes perfect sense. I get it. And so I thought, it would be really neat to have a high-end premium brand that you could sit all day in with a great camo pattern. And, for like 6 months, I'm thinking about camo, and you're looking at Realtree and Mossy Oak and the digital and, everything that's out there. And I just didn't like it. And I kind of did like the natural gear pattern. I really liked that. And I actually hunted in that some. And, I thought, a natural predator type camouflage, would make a lot of sense, but I still didn't have it. And exactly how it happened, I'm going to pull a stand out in October. 2 big great horn owls get in a fight above me, and one of them flies into a tree and completely disappears. You know how they do. I mean, their camouflage is insane. And so I walk over to him, and he's wiggling his head, and he flies into a pine, and he disappeared again. And kind of the light bulb started going off. I was like, man, this thing is an incredible tree predator. Nature made him with this camouflage. And so, to get a little bit nerdy, did some research, had a biologist and a veterinary friend of mine do some research on how prey animals see deer, rabbits, mice, squirrels, and they all have what they call dichromatic eyesight, and they don't see greens, but they all have very similar eyesight. And I said, all right, I'm no smart man, but nature made these rabbits, squirrels, deer, all to see a certain way, and they made this predator that catches some of those animals with that camouflage pattern. I said, I'm going to take that owl and make a camouflage pattern that has the shading, the colors, the depth of his pattern, and just steal it from him and put it on some high-end clothing. And that's exactly what we did. And I never will forget, I got the first printout of it when we finally got it dialed. And I went and started wrapping it around trees with the competition clothing that I had, and just looked at it from a micro perspective, really up close, and then macro, 70, 80 yards away. And I said, this is it. We've got the pattern. And we got, we started manufacturing the really high end windproof stuff, with waterproof liners in it, and bringing that premium brand to market. And it's been overwhelming, the guys that have gotten it, used it, hunted in it. But again, it's a huge competitive space, and social media and everything, those big companies, they own it. You got to chip away at it. And so our customer service, being a smaller company, we're able to take care of the guys, lifetime warranty. if anything happens ever, we're able to replace it immediately. And so it's a lot of fun. It's a heck of a lot of work, as y'all very well know. 4:30 in the morning, 10:30 at night, answering emails, answering messages, doing the thing, going to these shows for 9 days, from 8 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, talking to guys. But it's awesome. We love doing it, and we really do think it helps guys be more successful. Now you can kill a deer in blue jeans and a plaid shirt. I'm not going to debate that one bit. But what it does is it gives you that advantage of getting away with stuff that you couldn't. You're sitting there for 4 hours and you turn and he's right there. If you get on a plaid shirt and blue jeans, the chances of you getting busted are a lot greater than if you're decked head to toe in a really good camouflage pattern. And guys always say, is camo necessary, right? Is camo necessary? I say yes, because every natural predator in the world is camouflaged. Nature made him that way. There'd be no reason for why wouldn't he be orange or blue, or he is camouflage. A leopard, a coyote, a bobcat, a mountain lion, owls, hawks. They're all camouflage. So it's a natural thing, and we just wanted to follow that suit.
Makes a lot of sense.
KISS.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah.
I got the stupid part down.
Well, you hit the nail on the head with like the entire industry. It doesn't matter what product category you're in. It is ultra competitive, and similar to our story, like you get in the battle. I'm going to call it battle. You get in the battle with some major players. I mean, you're talking about KUIU. You have Jimmy John money. You talk about Sitka, owned by Gore Brands. You have First Light, that's backed by Meat Eater and a churning group. What are some, I guess, challenges and difficulties that you guys have kind of faced?
Yeah, well, it's just that. I mean, the Google search ads. I mean, okay, well, Whitetail cribs, right? We put that on, and every single commercial is First Light. And we're talking about, part of the segment was Asio, and every single commercial was First Light. So we've got a pretty sharp, small marketing team that again, thinks out of the box and learns ways to navigate that. That is absolutely not my forte, so I couldn't tell you how they do all that. But it gets, we get pretty good traction. I think also where we can win or be competitive is that we are super, super lean. That we have a very small warehouse, like $600 a month, and no air condition, no heat, in the fulfillment center. So Kevin's constantly cussing me out because he's having to pack
Cameron's
that stuff.
done the same to me.
Yeah. Having to pack that stuff in July. So staying super lean and mean, taking zero money out of the business as we get started, putting it all back in there, eating beanie weenies and loaf bread and drinking water. Trying to stay just as tight as you can. Where those guys, they have these huge budgets, and that's an advantage, for them. But to be competitive, as you're starting out, that's what you have to do. And then again, I don't know this to be true, but I feel like I hear this, that you can send one of these companies an email, and it can be 4 or 5 days before you get a reply. It's very generic. Whereas, man, I'll call the guy. They're like, "You're the owner of," you dang right I am. And I got no ego, brother. I'm trying to get my business going, and I want to help. And we want to continue that. Even if we became an 800-pound gorilla, which we do want to get a big space, part of the whitetail space. We do want to do that. I'm going to, as the owner, I'm going to demand that out of my team, is that we consistently do that. We're not going to be the company that once we make it, that the customers really, we've got millions of customers or thousands of customers, we're not going to take care of them, because they got us there.
Right.
I got guys that, I won't say bug, but they reach out. You know how it is. They reach out a lot, and I'm in bed at 10 o'clock at night with my wife, and this guy's messaging me again, and she's all right. Oh, you're too good to send that guy that spent $1,500 in clothing a reply. He's asking about a broadhead. I'm like, no, you're 100% right. Whatever it may be. So that's the mindset that we try and instill with the people that help us, and feel like we can really compete in that area. And guys appreciate that.
100%. I mean, that's exact. I mean, that whole thing is very similar to our approach and what we've been able to do over the last 8 years. And I actually think that there's starting to be a movement with consumer behavior wanting a more intimate relationship with the brands and the products that they're buying. And when you can deliver on that, you're creating lifetime value within that customer base. And it only takes, we talk, it doesn't matter what business you're in, but you talk the technical stuff, right? You talk about the analytics, you talk about conversion rates and all the numbers and whatnot. But the stuff that oftentimes is overlooked is
the person tied to it.
The person tied to it. And then when that person does come in and has a good experience with your brand, like it's usually not just that one guy, like you just penetrated his group and maybe he's the influencer of that group. And now you have 3 guys or 4 guys, and then they have their own little group. And it's amazing when you stick to where you do what you say you're going to do, which seems like the easiest thing. And just do what you're going to, just do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you have this wildfire growing like crazy.
Yep.
It's mind boggling that, so many businesses start like that and then they lose track of kind of where they came from.
Without a doubt.
We always say head in the clouds and feet on the ground. Like you keep your feet on the ground and stay humble with what you have going on.
Absolutely right.
It's I love hearing that story.
Yeah, well, thank you. And you guys know it's just like you look at the successful guys in any business, and I'll go back. We talked about it earlier. If they have the Kobe Bryant, if they have the Tom Brady, if they have those mindsets, I don't care if you're selling drink straws. If you look at it like that, you want to be a good deer hunter, you want to be a good golfer, whatever. If you take that mindset and put it in there, we live in America, man. You can absolutely do it. It's one of those things that the hard work and being savvy and thinking about it and obsessing over it 24/7, you can do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. So if any of our listeners, where would you direct any of our listeners to learn more about what you have going on?
Yeah, so AsioGear.com is our website. Joe Miles Hunting on Instagram is my personal Instagram, and man, I'm on that thing all the time. And finally got to where I could figure it out. Had some coaching. So there, and then we've got a podcast. Mission Whitetail is our podcast, and let's see, AsioGear.com, the Asio Gear social media, Instagram, Facebook, all that, and that's where everybody can get us.
What about any other trade shows for 2023?
Yes, we're going to be in Columbus. We're going to be in Indiana. Indiana is next. That's in 2 weekends. Columbus in March. Going to be in Alabama. Going to be in Georgia, and going to be in Wisconsin. So we'll be hammering it.
Hell yeah! Good luck to you.
Our season starts August 15th, and we've got one that starts August 18th. So, Kevin, I hope you're listening to this. You'll be in the office. You'll be in that trade show August 18th. I won't be.
Well, Joe, thanks for spending some time with us this morning. Much appreciated.
Really appreciate y'all including me. Thank you very much.